Welcome to our conversations on the future of work and leadership. I'm Elizabeth Varghese, and over the past few weeks, I've been having conversations with New Yorkers who are living and working on the front lines of the COVID pandemic. As all of you know, it's been a very interesting and challenging time for many of us. We have with us today one of New York's heroes, Dr. Anita Srinivasan. Dr. Anita Srinivasan is an accomplished general surgeon with a focus on breast cancer care, medical education, and global and population health research and policy. Currently, she's the Deputy Chief Medical Officer and Director of Perioperative Services at the Metropolitan Hospital. As some of you may recall, the Metropolitan Hospital is at the heart of New York City's combat against the pandemic. Thank you for that. Thank you for your service and everything you're all doing.
Thank you.
Sarita, tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, what brought you to New York City? I know you're a mom who's also juggling work and life here.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's a pleasure to be here. A lot of my work ethic came from my mom, who's a surgeon, right. And dad was an anesthesiologist. I came when I was about 22, interviewed at New York. And in the South Bronx, I got a residency spot in Lincoln Hospital, which was a big and busy trauma center.
Right.
But I rode that subway to Lincoln. I was sucked in. So I've been in New York for since the 90s, and I've been working in this hospital for about 18 years, which is again part of the New York City Health and Hospital Corporation. We are a municipal hospital network. I would say most of my formative years were my residency years in the South Bronx, so I most relate to New York.
Thank you. And you've been doing a ton of work with indigent and immigrant populations in the city, right?
Yes.
And I know you've been supporting a lot of work around healthcare disparities and quality education. So again, multifaceted person, Dr. Srinivasan. I know she also has young children she's self-isolating from, right, at home. How have you seen your work change as the pandemic has unfolded?
Since the COVID pandemic unfolded, a lot has changed at work. And I realized there are so many facets to running a hospital, and everything has to come together for it to be functional. What I like about a hospital is the size of the hospital, the transparency, and the structure, right. Team spirit, that we meet every day and we plan for the day during the peak of the epidemic and the peak of the pandemic. And even now, things are organized in such a fashion. There's a lot of transparency and communication. And that gave us the ability to be creative and adapt very quickly. We extended our beds rapidly, quickly. We went from a small community hospital to becoming a 4 ICU hospital with a maximum amount of ventilated patients. We added a morgue. We added a wonderful palliative service because there were special criteria around these patients. And that was my personal favorite. Right. There was a collaborative team of doctors and nurses, people who were not trained to run ICUs, were re-educated. Of course, we all got that during our training, but we needed a refresher. We got that. People volunteered and came in to run ICUs, to work in the testing centers. And we had to close our operating rooms. We were pushed to do telehealth overnight. So many aspects of this have changed. And some of those changes are going to be permanent. Right. Some of them are brought to light our strengths and our capacities that we hope to actually maintain and actually capitalize on going forward.
Great. And you did some of that preliminary work on setting up that palliative care center, right? Talk to us a little bit about that.
So that was something that our nursing colleague, you will hear from my CNO, and I, and the medical director, we were lucky enough to have at this time a palliative director of palliative care who also was trained in pulmonary medicine. And he was exceptional in that he understood disease. And in the initial part of the pandemic, when we started seeing these patients rapidly coming in, they were crashing, meaning they needed these ventilators much after everything else, of course, was tried. Right. But we also saw some of them had maxed out on everything you could do for them. So we were proactive. I used to do these daily rounds in the ICU. Nursing used to alert me saying, go around and see these patients. And I would then flag them up, introduce the ICU doctor to the palliative doctor, who then initiated conversations with the families. The families were spoken to multiple times, offered the support. But remember, this was done in a remote fashion.
Right.
So it needed an extra experience from the person who had done palliative care. And he would then tell the family that we've maxed out on what we can do. But if we create this special space, which nursing was able to do, and they immediately did it overnight, you have to realize all this happened very, very rapidly.
Right.
And they created a space where we could at least allow one family member to come in and see the person who we thought was not going to make it through the next day. And that was, I have to say, in this whole pandemic, the first day that I felt like we had done something constructive. Because the way we got hit with this disease, we just felt like we were drowning.
Right.
We could not survive it. But it's nice to talk about it now, a few weeks later. But at that time, we really felt very helpless. And this was one of the few things we felt was a positive.
Right. So lots of changes in how you were working, and you were all coming together to respond and come up with different strategies on treatment plans, and even pulling in or creating different ways of care as things played out. You touched upon telemedicine and how a lot of it is being done remotely. As you reflect upon all of these experiences, how do you think COVID is going to impact your profession and the work that you're doing? Do you see this continuing? How talk to us a little bit about that.
So that's a great question about how do I see my profession, which is the doctors and in general medical providers' future. I think it's changed for good. There's no going back. There's going to be a new normal. And the earlier we accept it, the better we are for it. I would start at the very grassroots.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the medical students will rethink the profession again, because we had all become complacent on what are the risks of this profession. People like me and my previous generation who had seen epidemics like HIV, hepatitis, we knew the risks coming in, multi-drug resistant TB, but this generation was getting a little too complacent. They thought technology will fill in for what they don't need to do. They can be hands-off, and still it's a lucrative profession. That thing will change. But that's a thinking that will change for good, because we will actually get the best and the brightest and the passionate people back into the profession. And what the universities can do is much like some of them are already doing. Those with deep pockets and endowments can offer this education for free.
Right.
And continue to do this. The basic thinking is, what can we do for healthcare? And that has to come from every aspect of industry and education and establishment. And when that happens, then you will have medical students who are really passionate. And moreover, we have to completely revamp and rethink the way we provide incentives to medical practitioners. What that would do, what do I mean by that? Payers have to rethink about what they've been doing all this while. They've been rewarding super specialists with extra reimbursement while ignoring the primary care and the basic caregivers. What this pandemic brought for us was a spotlight on the basic caregivers, internal medicine, pulmonary medicine being the tenet of this, and what super specialists did who wanted to participate, retrained themselves and came in and participated. So the payers, including the federal payers, have to rethink about how they reward people like us in hospitals who maintain communities as healthy communities. We have to reward preventive medicine. We have to reward patients who can maintain their diabetes, hypertension. Right now, the system rewards people who just, have uncontrolled diabetes, who go on to then having to need, very specialized surgeries with large payments.
Right.
That's the way we should think about it. We should actually reward the people who are preventing the patients from going into and needing these specialized treatments. People have to adapt. They have to adapt to technology. We will stop having patients come in unless they really, really have to come in.
Right.
And we have to get reimbursed for that. We can't be punished for telling patients, we care about your safety, so stay out of the hospitals. We will do telehealth. And then if you get only a meager compensation for that from the payers,
Right.
then that's not going to encourage us. But it's going to need a whole revamping. And the system of rewarding at the top and rewarding a few has to come down. And maintaining municipal hospitals is something I'm very passionate about. In this pandemic, New York City has proven that health and hospitals is one of the key players in dealing with this. We took care of patients, and we've always taken care of patients irrespective of their ability to pay. And you have to give us a support we need in order to continue doing this, because this is not going to be the first pandemic and it's not going to be the last.
Right.
With many more coming, you have to give us the support we need to prepare for these disasters and acknowledge that we play a key role. So the fundings that we always were owed from federal, state, there was always a delay in getting this, and it was disproportionately going to tertiary care centers and private centers that were supposed to share the burden. But we always took the burden on the municipal hospitals in a very disproportionate way, but we need to be supported.
Right.
To streamline our own internal systems, absolutely. We will look at our own internal systems, we will streamline it, but we will still have a core percentage of patients that will not be able to pay for services. We should be able to compensate for that with support, as well as making up for it with the paying patients. So we have to think about this internally, but at the same time, we need external support from all the industry we can get.
Got it. Wow. So really a very profound and deep reset of the healthcare process and the system that you folks have have lived through. What have you noticed about leadership and the important things to hold on to?
Leadership skills are very important, and I think we saw leaders here that we never knew existed, even among the common folk. Yeah. And as a leader, I realized the number one thing is communication, communication, communication. There has to be communication to the people below you. If you don't tell them what is going on, then you will face unexpected problems. And we've had those. There are people who have the strength to face the unknown, which is what this pandemic was. And then there were people who are frail of spirit who wanted to exit the scene. People in the morgue who impressed me. I didn't know we had an all-women team running the morgue. They had to increase the capacity, and they did a fantastic job. So there was a lot of leadership skills, not only from the top leaders, but all at every level that was recognized. In terms of actual leadership planning, I felt by meeting, as much as I love Zoom meetings, we did have social distanced in-person meetings every day early morning, where our leaders would speak, we would give our opinion, we were all heard, and that kept us a couple of steps ahead. I would say my main thing is, if I'm a leader, I would tell my employees, and which I did, do not let the fear paralyze you.
Right.
Do not let this paralyze you. You have to function with common sense and the knowledge that you have at the time to move forward. And the number one strength that we had to survive this was adaptability. We adapted very, very nicely to this. And maybe it was the size of our hospital, maybe it was the cast of characters that were leaders in the building. We all complemented each other with our strengths, and I think we are better for it.
Right. Wow, so that's really moving. You talk about so many different aspects of the experience that your team has really gone through, right from the top of the the leadership team to all the way across every single function in the organization, and the folks really showing up to serve and be willing to contribute in ways that put themselves at risk. That's truly really, really powerful and moving. Thank you to all of you for what you've been doing. Dr. Srinivasan, you also talked about the adaptability aspect of leadership and not being paralyzed by fear. Any examples or stories you can share?
Is one of the things we did when we needed to expand the ICUs. We were talking about it on a Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, we had to open a new unit.
Wow.
It requires a lot. An ICU that requires a lot of moving parts, which is nursing, staffing, technical aspects of it, the pharmacy, every little part came together. But what was more interesting was some positive stories where people who were super specialists retrained themselves and came in and decided to do this. We had vascular surgeons who decided to come in and play ICU doctors. An entire ICU was manned by anesthesia who normally don't do this. Right. The anesthesia team decided that they'll go back, they'll read on their critical care training, come back and run an ICU. And they even had staffing from dental that were residents going through their training, sitting there in the middle of this ICU, surrounded by COVID patients that were dying. One of the things personally that I really found many, many touching stories and positive stories came out of this was the physicians and the nurses got personally actually attached to the patients and their stories.
Right.
Had students communicating with the families by daily telephone calls, and they felt they were part of it. They were not supposed to come to the bedside, but they would find out the stories, and the families were so thankful of that. Now we got a support of a whole bunch of iPads that nurses carry into the rooms and communicate with the families, and that was very touching. And one of the stories where I saw very early on, we used to get transfers from multiple hospitals, and
Right.
those patients came in extremis. And one story was a gentleman who looked like he was almost not going to make it. He coded a couple of times, which means it's a near-death experience. And he went to this newly formed ICU in the recovery area that was manned by anesthesiologists. And I just used to look at him every day, and I said, this person's not going to make it, not going to make it. We didn't have any information about him, but we needed to put an age in the EMR system. So we put him as 120 years. He didn't know anything. He was nonverbal.
Right.
And week 3 or week 2.5 came down. He started improving very slowly. The doctors and the nurses who took care of him were very personally attached. And one fine day, his breathing tube came out.
Wow.
And we found out his actual age was 44.
My goodness.
The nurses were crying, the doctor was crying, the patient was crying. It's a wonderful experience. And we may even see him go home very soon.
Any messages you want to share with us about what are you telling your kids about what's important? What are you telling your patients about what's real and true in this world in crises like these?
The nice thing is, because I'm self-isolating, my husband's become a gourmet chef. I get dinner served to me. This is wonderful. And it took 20 years of marriage to get there. But there. And the kids actually go to the window and do the 7 o'clock cheer. If I'm home before 7 o'clock, I get to hear it. It's very, very encouraging. They've been trying not to fight and bicker in my presence because my time at home is very limited.
Right.
So a lot of positives came out of this. What I don't see is how their online learning is going. Tell the kids of the next generation, choose a profession based on your passion. And if you do that, the money will follow, the success will follow. If you choose it based on the money, you're never going to make enough and you'll never be happy.
Wow, well said, well said. And, again, thank you so much. Any closing remarks from a New Yorker? Anything else you just want to share?
As a New Yorker, I think we're all survivors. We will come out of this as better human beings to respect each other and the environment. The subway, Central Park, Bronx Zoo, and the Yankees are all going to be there for the next generation. So please relax. And this is just a pause where I see the air clearing up, the sky is cleaner, and the birds are willing to chirp. So just enjoy that while it lasts before the hustle and bustle comes back.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Srinivasan. So true. We are New Yorkers. We all will survive and get through this to a better day. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you.